All right. It's time for Buckeye Grove Instant Access.
It's about time.
With the latest breaking news, analysis, and much, much more from around the world of Ohio State. Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com and the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You're so money and you don't even know it.
Let's move quickly and hand it off to our host, Kevin Noon.
It's time to start running!
Hey, welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon, as always, and we are glad to have you. Not necessarily against the backdrop of any breaking news today, but, we're kind of living in odd times right now, so we figured we'd hit the podcast waves. I am joined with Braden Moles, senior intern of BuckeyeGrove.com. How are you doing, Braden?
I'm doing good. How about you? Thank you
doing
for the
great.
title upgrade.
Don't tell Keaton. We'll talk to Keaton maybe later this week, early next week. So we're living in some surreal times right now. I mean, just with the landscape of sports and whatnot. I mean, thank God for the NFL for having all sorts of news here in the silly season to keep us all, somewhat sane.
Yeah, it's certainly some uncharted territory. I mean, in terms of my lifetime, I am not to brag to you, but I am not quite old enough to really remember anything that happened during 9/11. So there has not been a break of sports at any point during my life like this. So it certainly is an odd time to live in. For me personally, as a Colts fan, I'm excited about all the news I've heard about lately. But other than that, yeah, I had made a post on the board about how it's like, I'm stuck watching bass pro fishing. It's like, what have we come to now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I am old enough, obviously, to remember 9/11. And for those who aren't members of Buckeye Grove, first of all, come on and join us, join the best community in Ohio State sports and, see what's going on there. But I've told the story there that I was a producer at Fox Sports Net Southwest in Florida at the time. And obviously, sports were canceled at that point. So I was told in no uncertain terms, we'll call you when we need you. And all of Fox programming pretty much was off the air. I mean, they were all simulcasting Fox News Channel at the time, and it was a very weird time to go through and whatnot. But we're looking at a much longer term issue here with where we're at right now. This isn't I don't think we're going to be seeing sports back in 2 weeks or anything along those lines. I mean, you have conferences already coming out and canceling their slate for the remainder of the season. You have MLB talking about, a much delayed start to the season. I mean, of course, people are already starting to freak out about, could this be something long-term enough that could impact college football season?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a case to be made that with the different cancellations and postponements that have been made, that football may be the next sport that shows up on the calendar. I mean, with how much they're going to have to delay the MLB and NBA and even NHL schedules, we're getting into situations like, is that going to cut into their next season? So it really is uncharted territory here in terms of what these leagues are going to do about these postponements. But I don't think it's out of the question that football is the next sport that we could see return to a regular basis on our calendars.
We were all in Indianapolis for the Big Ten basketball tournament when things really ramped up, and we went out a day early for the first day of competition, which was the Wednesday. Had the opportunity to see I saw one of the games. Keaton and Braden saw both of the games. I ended up taking off and going to have some wings and a beer or two and whatnot. The whole situation with, the backdrop of the Big Ten tournament certainly was an odd one.
Yes, I mean, it certainly felt at a point like the games that were being played just didn't matter. I mean, so as we were sitting there during the second game, during the first game, when we were first getting into Banks Life Fieldhouse, we had already seen the news that the NCAA tournament was going to be held without fans. And that was the most recent update we had going into the game's beginning. Then as the games progressed, we learned during the first game that there would be no fans in attendance in the Big Ten tournament. And later during the second game between Nebraska and Indiana, Keith and I were sitting up in the press box, and we saw the news that the NBA had suspended their season. at which point things officially began to hit the fan when we saw Fred Hoiberg leave the bench near the end of the Nebraska game. So it later came out that Hoiberg had just been diagnosed with regular influenza, but it was a surreal moment kind of thinking, the coronavirus to us, we have, for me personally, I live in Preble County, Ohio, so it's not something that's been close to me yet. But being in that arena where you're thinking, is it possible that this head coach has coronavirus right now? It became very surreal, and it really hit you. It's like, this is here. This could be happening. So, as the games went on, it really just, it didn't seem like they mattered in terms of the grand scope of everything that was going on.
Yeah, I told you, too, that if they were going to lock you guys in place and quarantine you for 14 days, I wasn't sticking around Indianapolis. You guys, I would have sent you the number to Greyhound, maybe PayPal'd you a couple of bucks, but you guys were on your own at that point. Let's talk a little bit about, Ohio State's basketball season, bigger picture. I mean, Ohio State was the 7 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They were going to take on number 10 Purdue. Despite being the number 7 seed, I think Ohio State was probably one of the hotter teams in the Big Ten down the stretch, winners of 9 of their last 12. Probably going to get a 5 seed in the NC2A tournament, maybe with a nice little run in Indianapolis. If that would have happened, they could have gotten up to the bottom of the 4 line. But, what your thoughts on the basketball season in general, and, maybe what this team could have done if there were, games to be played beyond what we saw?
Yeah. I think in terms of the Big Ten tournament, I don't really think, the grand scheme of things, I don't really think it was going to matter what they did unless they dropped the game to Purdue. Like you had said, it was likely they were going to get 5 seed or maybe even higher, depending on how the rest of the tournament went. But I think with the short rotation they're working on, with Kyle Young being out for such an extended period, I really think the goal for them was getting to the tournament and seeing what they could do there. And I really think that if they were able to get Young back and play like they had during the latter parts of February and earlier in the season in the non-conference schedule, I think it's a team that could have gone to, maybe the second weekend, certainly, maybe the Sweet 16. Because I think they had the types of playmakers that, like you had said, were playing among some of the best teams in the country down the stretch. So I think it really is just a shame to, have their season cut short like this when I really do think they could have made a run.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we've seen in the previous 2 seasons, Chris Holtmann-led teams win their opening round game, get into the round of 32 game, lead at some various points in the second half, and then come up short. I think that, the tournament is so matchup driven to begin with that you just there could have been nobody wanted to play like East Tennessee State. If that were a 5-12 matchup, that would have been a bad matchup for about anybody, especially when that team's on. So, with that not in the picture, though, I think Ohio State certainly could have made it into the second weekend. And again, it's just all about matchups at that point. I mean, if they're at that 5 line and then they get through the 4-5 game, I mean, they'd end up drawing a 1, and you just really don't know at that point. I mean, do you draw some? I mean, do they get cute with the bracket? Do they draw Dayton? I mean, that's a scary nightmare type of situation just in terms of how in-state is set up. But, I also watched some Flyers games to where they kind of frittered around until the end, only to pull it out late. I mean, do you draw Baylor? I mean, do you draw Kansas? I mean, there are a lot of situations at that point that you just don't know, and it's hard to predict. But even with playing 7 guys, and the hope would have been Kyle Young would have been back. Still with that short rotation, at least it's a little bit more beneficial for Ohio State in the NC2A tournament versus the Big Ten tournament, because you're not being asked to play 4 games in 4 days. It's, play a game, interview day, play a game. You're doing 2 games in 3 days, which, might work a little bit better on tired legs.
And I'll say with, it obviously you said it's matchup driven in the NCAA tournament, but I think Ohio State, even if they were still working with short rotation like you mentioned, they were a team that I think was built to go deep, because the Big Ten, I would not hear the argument about whether or not the Big Ten is the best conference in college basketball, But I think without a doubt, it was certainly the most difficult conference to play in this season. You know, with a three-way tie at 14-6 for the Big Ten regular season title. So I think, you know, even if they were still playing the short rotation, they were so battle tested, especially over, you know, the early part of the season. I think they were really able to grow in the way they play in the Big Ten, and I think that really would have set them up for a nice run in March. So it's just, you know, especially for Andre Weston and Danny Hummer and likely Caleb Weston, who have all played their last game for Ohio State, it's just unfortunate to see it end like that.
It really is. And, you know, and I guess we'll just never know. I was very much opposed to the NC2A decision not to put out brackets of any sort. I mean, I can understand their discussion that everything kind of got tabled and everybody who was on the selection committee had to hurry back to their, you know, to their day jobs and lead their schools through these types of situations. But, you know, I think it's a darn shame for these kids, especially the seniors, not to be able to come back and be able to point up to a banner that says, yeah, we were part of the 2020 NC2A tournament. I mean, the one that never happened, but it's still an accomplishment in of itself, I think.
Yeah, I think it's something else that's interesting thing about it there is, like, you know, for coaches who have like contract stipulations about making it to a tournament game, it's like, you know, is that still going to go into effect this year, or, you know, we don't know how many of that's going to play out. So I think I agree it would have been beneficial to at least release a bracket. Now, on the other hand, there I also understand the difficulty of that when you didn't have any of the conference tournaments finished. You know, when you look at like a Purdue team that may have been on the bubble, but what do you do with them when, you know, they didn't get to play any of their tournament games? So it would have been difficult to release a field, but I think it would have been beneficial not only for coaches but for kind of cleaning up the record books in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not as worried about the coaches. I mean, granted, we're in basketball, we're not talking about everybody being a millionaire at that point. They're all well compensated. I'm more concerned about the student athletes in that situation, but all of that is definitely a factor. We're going to jump in with a break, and on the flip side, we're going to talk a little bit about football, and then we're going to just talk about a little bit more of the strange times we're in, and kind of put a little bit of a wrapper on Braden's time as an intern with Buckeye Grove. So be sure to keep it locked in here. We'll be back in about 30 seconds. Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Hey, welcome back to the BIA podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon, joined by Braden Moles. Let's talk a little football now. That break was a nice opportunity to split the sports. We really didn't get to see much of a spring practice, obviously. We had the opportunity to get in there early, see them in shorts and whatnot. They went on their scheduled spring break, and then all hell broke loose after that point. So spring practice is shut down for the foreseeable future. I mean, we may see something on the tail end before the academic term. Last day of classes, April 20th, even though they're not in-person classes. But I'm not optimistic we're going to see any of that just based on all the news there. I mean, you know, what are your thoughts about you know, how this is going to impact the football team?
You know, I think it'll certainly be there will be an impact in terms of figuring out the depth chart for this upcoming season. But I think you have so many returning players for Ohio State in the skill positions that, you know, it's not as much an issue there that they won't necessarily have that much extra practice or anything. And additionally, in terms of the competitive balance that Gene Smith spoke about on Friday, you know, with so many teams taking the steps to cancel these spring practices, I don't see Ohio State going to a competitive disadvantage against these other teams if everybody is going to be missing out on this time. But I think the biggest impact is going to come in, you know, freshmen that we're going to be pushing for the depth chart. I mean, you know, what does this say for the right tackle battle between Nicholas Petit-Frere and Paris Johnson? You know, if Johnson isn't going to get a chance to show off in spring practice, it's possible that MPF could end up taking that job just because, you know, he's the only one that they really have much film on. So I think it'll certainly be an impact there. Not so much on the guys that have been there for a few years, but maybe the ones that we're going to make a push on the depth chart.
I mean, and obviously we don't want to seem insensitive to the plight of what's going on across the globe right now and seem, pithy and trivial by putting so much here on sports, but hell, we're a sports podcast. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. I mean, what do you think about this situation of if we kind of get out of the weeds, in June or whatnot, with the season starting in early September, really, fall camp should start a month before that. So, the beginning of August. I think that probably the most likely situation is that they just open fall camp earlier in terms of July and give these guys, the opportunity to work with the coaches to be able, I mean, especially for the guys who weren't mid-year enrollees, to have that crash course with the strength and conditioning program and whatnot. I mean, they'd all been given marching orders, but, at least here in the state of Ohio, gyms have been closed as well. So everybody's going to be scrambling, trying to find private gyms inside homes and things to stay in shape. But, I don't know if there's any benefit of trying to bring this back too early. I think that you just try and tack it on and start earlier. At least that's what I think the best option is.
Yeah, I think it's just my personal opinion. I think it's going to be a while before we get back to some normalcy in terms of these types of things opening back up. So I think the only solution there really would, if you're wanting to make up that time, would be to start fall camp early because especially since it'll be over the summer, frankly, I don't even know how the NCAA would feel about, bringing these students back over the summer early to get them back into the program. So I think, unless we suddenly, everything's quarantined off and we're good here in a few weeks, I don't see how you can really get them back in there any sooner than before fall camp. But even then, basically everybody will just kind of be running a trial or a crash course of the same guys that are going to be that weren't early enrollees in the 2020 class. So I think everybody will just kind of have to get with the groove, whether it's early in July or if it'll just be a normal fall camp schedule that they kind of have to accelerate.
Yeah, and if they bring everybody back early, obviously there's expectation of summer coursework, and with spring coursework all being online, what does that mean for summer? And, something that impacts you, we just learned that commencement is going to be postponed, and you as a graduating senior, obviously that's going to impact you.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess right now. They've even, I don't know if you saw yesterday, they actually extended the academic semester through April 27th to make up for the weird extended spring break. I don't want to claim they don't know what they're doing. It's a difficult time. It just seems weird with everything they're doing, but it's certainly unfortunate. Commencement's going to be postponed, or potentially canceled at a later date. But I also understand why they're doing what they have to do. You can't have these types of events with, tens of thousands of people hanging out in these times when, a lot of it will be probably older family members, students that are coming to watch their grandchildren or children graduate. So I understand why they're doing it. Selfishly for me, it's kind of unfortunate, but I understand why they're doing it.
Staying kind of on a personal note, how have you been filling your time other than having me say more stories since, having to, having the opportunity to go back home and whatnot and continue your coursework via, as they say, distance learning?
Well, so our coursework actually hasn't started back yet. Since they extended our spring break, we actually don't start classes again until this upcoming Monday. But in my free time, I've been, like you said, just writing stories, catching up on some TV shows. Like we had talked about how this is finally a good time for me to catch up on Better Call Saul. But other than that, seeing what hobbies I can maybe pick up, spending time with family, at a social distance, of course, 6 feet. And, catching up with friends before everything eventually gets quarantined. So, yeah, just trying to fill time.
You could always pick up my favorite hobby, and that's drinking bourbon. But yeah, you're still a young pup. You're of legal consuming age, but you've got some time to pick that one up. In all actuality, your internship still runs through April, so people aren't going to be saying goodbye to you yet, and even here on the BIA podcast, but you're probably done in terms of covering live events. What are I'm going to ask you for two and why. What were the two favorite events that you covered? Not necessarily like, this play or whatever, but, big picture, what are you going to take away is, hey, that was a really neat experience?
I think the first would be during, I don't know if people may not have known this, but during the Michigan game up in Ann Arbor this year, I was actually on the field taking photographs. So that was an experience, seeing the big house from field level and kind of staying there for the entire game, watching the whole situation with Justin Fields and his injury and him coming back to the game from field level was an incredible experience. Not to mention, watching Ohio State win, I believe it was 56-27 or something like that, in the big house. That's an experience I'll never forget. And then the second would likely be the Fiesta Bowl. Just in general, being given the opportunity to cover a college football playoff game, and not just a college football playoff game, but one of that caliber. There have been plenty of kind of clunkers of playoff games where teams have won by multiple touchdowns. But this was probably one of the closest, one of the best college football playoff games between Ohio State and Clemson. And just being on the field for that final drive, standing next to Urban Myers, he's watching Ohio State try to drive down and take the lead, and then being 20 yards away from the guy who pissed off Justin Fields in the end zone. It's an experience that it was unfortunate to watch, but for me, it's something I'm never going to forget.
Well, we were definitely glad to have you, and as I said, we're not saying goodbye to you yet. We're gonna start ramping up a little bit more of our BIA podcasts here when we don't necessarily have as many live events to be covering. But I want to thank Braden for joining us, and I want to thank you for being with us here on the BIA podcast. Once again, I am your host, Kevin Noon, and we will talk to you very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.